The morning the police came to my door, I was making toast, 2 slices, lightly buttered, the way I'd made them every morning for the last 41 years. The kettle was whistling. The radio was playing some old Slim Dusty song my wife always hummed along to. And then the doorbell rang, and a young constable with kind eyes told me that my wife, Eleanor Harriet Whitlock, had been killed in a head-on collision on the Prince's Highway just outside of Malakuta. She was 68 years old. I am 64. And until that morning, I believed I knew everything there was to know about the woman I'd shared my bed with for 4 decades. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost everything. My name is Gregory Whitlock. I'm a retired structural engineer from the Mornington Peninsula, just south of Melbourne. Eleanor and I met at a bushwalking club in 1984, married in 1985, and never had children of our own, though not for lack of trying. The doctors told us, after years of disappointment, that it simply wasn't going to happen. Eleanor accepted it more easily than I did. She used to say that the universe gives every couple a different kind of garden, and ours just happened to be one without flowers. I never quite believed that, but I loved her too much to argue. What I'm about to tell you happened over the course of 3 weeks last autumn. It began with a funeral and ended with a door I never expected to open. And somewhere in between, every single thing I thought I knew about my wife came undone, thread by thread, until I was left holding nothing but the truth, which, as it turned out, was far more beautiful and far more painful than any of the lies. Eleanor's funeral was held on a gray Thursday in April. The chapel in Frankston was full. She had been a librarian for 35 years, and the queue of people who came to pay their respects stretched out into the car park. Old colleagues, reading group friends, members of the choir she sang with on Wednesday nights. I stood at the door, shaking hands until my fingers ached, smiling the way you smile when smiling is the only thing keeping you upright. After the service, a man I didn't recognize approached me. He was tall, perhaps 70, with silver hair combed back neatly and a navy suit that had seen better days. He introduced himself as Mr. Desmond Carmichael, a solicitor from a firm in East Melbourne I'd never heard of. "Mr. Whitlock," he said quietly, "I'm terribly sorry for your loss. I know this is a difficult time, but I'd be grateful if you could come to my office sometime this week. Your wife left certain instructions that I'm bound to deliver to you in person." I assumed it was something to do with her superannuation. Eleanor had always handled our finances. She had a head for numbers that I never did, and I supposed there were forms to sign. I told him I'd come Monday. But that night, lying in our empty bed, listening to the ocean down the road, I started to think about Mr. Carmichael's choice of words. Certain instructions, bound to deliver. It was an odd thing to say about superannuation paperwork. Monday came. I drove into the city in a daze. Mr. Carmichael's office was on the 3rd floor of a Victorian building near Fitzroy Gardens, all dark wood paneling and the smell of old books. He sat me down across from him, poured me a glass of water, and slid a small manila envelope across the desk. "Your wife came to see me 11 years ago," he said. "She left this with explicit instructions that it was to be given to you only in the event of her death, along with a key and an address." He placed the envelope and a single brass key on the desk. The key was attached to a leather fob with the word Driftwood embossed on it. The address was written on a folded piece of paper underneath. Lot 7, Coastal Cliff Road, Apollo Bay. I stared at it for a long time. Apollo Bay was a 4-hour drive west, on the Great Ocean Road. Eleanor had told me she went there twice a year for what she called her research retreats, long weekends where she'd stay in a little cottage and work on a book. She said she was writing about regional libraries in Victoria. She'd been doing it for as long as I could remember, maybe 20 years, maybe more. She always went alone. She always asked me, very gently but very firmly, not to ring her while she was there. She said the silence was part of the work. I had never once questioned it. I had never once doubted her. "Mr. Carmichael," I said slowly, "what is this place?" He folded his hands. "I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to say more than what your wife instructed me to tell you. The property is registered in your name, transferred from hers, as of the moment of her death. The mortgage was paid off in 2019. There is also a separate trust account associated with the address, which I can discuss with you at a later date if you wish. But the rest, Mr. Whitlock, the rest you'll need to discover for yourself." I drove home with the envelope and the key on the passenger seat. I didn't open the envelope. I'm not sure why. Perhaps because I knew, somehow, that whatever was inside would change everything, and I wasn't ready for everything to change quite yet. I waited 4 days. I tidied the house. I rang my brother in Adelaide. I went down to the beach and watched the waves come in, and felt very, very old. And then, on Friday morning, I packed a small overnight bag, put the key in my coat pocket, and drove west toward Apollo Bay. The drive along the Great Ocean Road has a way of clearing your head. The cliffs falling away to the sea, the gum trees bending in the wind, the koalas dozing in the branches near Kennet River. Eleanor had loved this stretch of road. She'd told me so many times. I just never realized how often she'd actually driven it. I reached Apollo Bay just after 1 in the afternoon. Coastal Cliff Road wound up out of the town toward a headland that overlooked the ocean. Lot 7 was at the very end, and what I saw when I pulled into the driveway made me stop the car and sit for a long moment with my hands on the wheel, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't a cottage. It wasn't a little weekender. It was a beautiful timber and stone home, 2 stories high, with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the sea and a wide deck wrapping around the front. A garden full of native plants, banksias, grevias, kangaroo paw, grew along the path to the front door. There was a small studio out the back, and beyond that, a stone bench where someone had clearly sat many times, watching the waves. This was not a research retreat. This was a home. Someone's home. I walked up to the front door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. I took a breath, turned it, and pushed the door open. And there, sitting on a sofa in the living room, was a young woman holding a cup of tea. She looked up at me. She had Eleanor's eyes. Exactly. Eleanor's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that I'd looked into across 1,000 breakfast tables. She had Eleanor's mouth, too, and the same way of tilting her head slightly to the left when she was thinking. She set the cup down very carefully on the coffee table, stood up, and said in a voice that was steady but full of something I couldn't yet name, "You must be Gregory. I've been waiting for you. My name is Marigold. I'm Eleanor's daughter." I don't know how long I stood there. It might have been 30 seconds. It might have been 5 minutes. The world had gone strange and silent around me, like the moment after a wave breaks and before the next one comes. "Daughter," I finally said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. She didn't have a daughter. Marigold, that was the name she'd said. Marigold gestured to the sofa opposite hers. "Please, sit down, Gregory. I know this must be a terrible shock. She told me you wouldn't know. She said she wanted to be the one to tell you when the time was right. I'm so sorry the time was right, because she's gone." I sat down because my legs would no longer hold me. I looked at her properly. She was perhaps in her late 30s, maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back from her face and Eleanor's slim, careful hands. She was wearing jeans and a cream jumper. There were lines around her eyes that suggested she'd been crying. "And recently, how old are you?" I asked. It seemed an absurd question. but it was the only one my mind could form. I'm 39, she said. I was born in 1986, the year after Eleanor and I married. That's not possible, I said. She nodded slowly. I know. I know how it must look. May I tell you the whole story? It's the story she wanted you to hear. She wrote it all down for you. There's a letter, several letters, actually, but I'd like to tell you first, if you'll let me. Some of it is mine to tell. I nodded. I couldn't speak. Marigold poured me a cup of tea from a pot on the table. She did it with the same quiet competence Eleanor had always shown. Then she sat back down, folded her hands in her lap, and began to tell me a story I had never heard. My mother Eleanor was engaged once before she met you, she said. His name was Thomas Lindgren. They met when she was 23, working at the State Library. He was a Swedish researcher on a fellowship in Melbourne. They were together for 2 years. They were going to be married in the autumn of 1985. I knew Eleanor had been engaged before me. She'd told me as much on our third date, very honestly. She'd said it had ended badly, and she didn't like to talk about it. I had respected that. I'd never pushed. In May of 1985, Marigold continued. Thomas was killed in a climbing accident in the Grampians. They had been planning to climb together that weekend, but my mother had come down with the flu and stayed home. Thomas went with 2 other friends. There was a rockfall. He died instantly. Eleanor never told me he died, I said softly. She told me they'd broken up. Marigold's eyes filled with tears. I know. She told me she couldn't bear to say his name out loud, not for many years. She thought saying he was dead would make it real, in a way she couldn't survive. So she said they'd broken up. And after a while, that's what it became. A story she could live with. And you, I said. My throat was tight. You're his daughter. Yes. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She didn't know she was pregnant when he died. She found out 3 weeks after the funeral. She was devastated, Gregory. She was 25 years old, alone, grieving, and pregnant by a man who would never come home. Thomas's family in Sweden, they were lovely people, but they were grieving too. And his mother was very ill at the time. My mother decided not to tell them. She didn't want to give them a grandchild they would only love through letters. I tried to picture Eleanor at 25. The Eleanor I'd met just months later, in early 1986, at the bushwalking club. The Eleanor I'd fallen for almost immediately. I remembered now, God. I remembered how thin she had been when we first met, how sad her eyes were, even when she smiled. I had thought it was just her nature, a quiet melancholy that I found beautiful. She gave you up for adoption, I said. She did. To a family in Geelong. Lovely people, Frank and Patricia Holloway. They couldn't have children of their own. They raised me in a beautiful home, gave me everything, loved me deeply. I had a wonderful childhood, Gregory. I want you to know that. Eleanor made the right choice for me, given everything. But she stayed in your life? Marigold smiled then. For the first time. It was Eleanor's smile, and it broke something open in my chest. Not until I was 18. She'd insisted on a closed adoption. She wanted me to have a clean start, without the shadow of her grief over me. But she paid into a trust for me, from the moment I was born. Every birthday, every Christmas, she added to it. And when I turned 18, she contacted the Holloways and asked if I might want to know who my birth mother was. They asked me. I said yes. She paused. She looked out the window, toward the sea. I came to meet her in 2005. I was 19. We met in a cafe in the city. She was so nervous, her hands shook. I was nervous too, but within an hour, it was as though we'd known each other always. She told me everything about Thomas, about the accident, about the adoption, and then she told me about you. I leaned forward. About me? She said. Gregory is the best man I have ever known. He saved me when I didn't think I could be saved. I owe him my whole life. And then she said, but I have never been able to tell him about you. And I don't know if I ever will. Because if I tell him, I have to tell him everything about Thomas, about how broken I was, about all the years I let him believe a lie. And I'm afraid he won't forgive me. I was crying now. Quietly. The way men of my generation cry, when we've forgotten how, but our bodies remember anyway. So we made a decision together, Marigold said. She would be in my life. But quietly, privately, we'd meet here, at this house, which she bought in 2014 with money she'd inherited from her aunt. You remember her aunt's estate? I nodded. I remembered. Eleanor had inherited a substantial sum and had told me she'd invested most of it. I'd never asked for details. I'd trusted her completely. She bought this house and we'd come here twice a year, sometimes 3 times. We'd walk on the beach and cook together and talk. I have 2 children of my own now, Daisy, who's 9, and Henry, who's 6. They came too. Sometimes. They knew her as Auntie Ellie. They loved her enormously. I closed my eyes. 2 great children. Children Eleanor had played with on this very deck, looking out at this very ocean. Children whose names I had never heard until this moment. Why? I whispered. Why didn't she tell me? In all those years? 40 years. Marigold. I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have judged her. I wouldn't have been angry. I would have loved you. I would have loved your children. Marigold was crying openly now. She got up, came around the coffee table, and sat beside me. She took my hand. Her hand was warm and small, and it felt, somehow, like Eleanor's. She knew you would have, she said. She knew. That's exactly why she couldn't tell you. Don't you see, Gregory? She was ashamed. Not of me. Of the years of silence. Every year she didn't tell you. The lie got bigger. Until it was so big she didn't know how to begin. And there was something else. What? She thought she'd robbed you. Of fatherhood. She thought because she'd had a child before you, because she'd given that child away, she'd somehow stolen something from you that she couldn't return. She used to say, Gregory wanted children so badly. And I'd already given mine away. I couldn't tell him. It would break his heart. I had to put my head in my hands then. Because I could hear her saying it. I could hear Eleanor's voice. Exactly. The way she'd sometimes look at me when I was holding a friend's baby, with such terrible tenderness in her eyes. The way she'd grip my hand on the way home from a christening and not let go for hours. The way she'd cried, just once, when our neighbor's grandchildren ran through her garden. I'd thought it was because we'd never had any of our own. I had never imagined it was because she had. And she had given her away. And she could not forgive herself for it. There are letters, Marigold said softly. She wrote you a letter every year on my birthday, telling you about me. She kept them in a box upstairs. She said one day, when she was brave enough, she'd give them all to you. She wrote 40 of them, Gregory. 1 every year. I sat with that for a long time. The sun moved across the floor. Marigold made fresh tea. Outside, the wind moved through the banksias. I could hear, very faintly, the sound of children's voices somewhere down the path. Are those I began? Marigold smiled. Daisy and Henry are here. With my husband James. We came down yesterday. We weren't sure if you'd want to meet them today. So they're at the little playground down the road. I can ring James and ask him to keep them there as long as you need. No, I said. No. Bring them home. She looked at me carefully. Are you sure? They've lost their grandmother, Marigold. They shouldn't have to lose anyone else. Bring them home. She rang her husband. While we waited, she took me upstairs and showed me the box of letters. It sat on a small writing desk by the window, in a room Eleanor had clearly used as her own. There were photographs on the walls: Marigold as a baby, as a child, on her wedding day, holding her newborns. Photographs Eleanor had hidden from me for 19 years. Not out of cruelty, out of fear. I picked up the topmost letter. It was dated October 1986, the month and year of Marigold's birth. I sat down at the desk and I read. I read all afternoon. Marigold left me alone. I heard, at some point, a car pull up, and the voices of children, and a man's deep laugh, and the gentle hush of Marigold telling them that Grandad Gregory was upstairs and would come down when he was ready. Grandad Gregory. The words came through the floorboards and I stopped reading and I wept. Properly wept. For what felt like an hour. Eleanor's first letter, the one from 1986, ended with these words, which I will remember until the day I die. My darling Greg, I haven't told you yet about the daughter I gave away. I don't know if I ever will. But if you are reading this, then I have run out of years to find the courage. Please know that I loved you from the moment you smiled at me at the bushwalking club. Please know that I never lied to you about anything that mattered. And please know that the silence between us about her was not absence. It was the price I paid for not deserving you. I am so sorry, my love. I am so sorry. I read all 40 letters. The last one was dated 3 weeks before her death. In it, she said she had finally decided to tell me, on our 42nd anniversary, in November. She had bought me a fishing trip in Tasmania as a gift. She was going to take me to the airport. And on the way, she was going to tell me everything. She had made up her mind. She did not get to November. I came downstairs at sunset. Marigold's husband, James, was a kind-faced man with a gray beard who shook my hand without saying much, which I appreciated. The children were in the kitchen. Daisy was 9, with Eleanor's hair that thick honey brown that never quite went gray. Henry was 6, missing his front teeth, with bright, curious eyes. They looked up at me. Daisy said, very seriously, "Are you our real granddad?" I knelt down on the kitchen floor, slowly, because my knees aren't what they were. "I am, if you'll have me," I said. Henry threw his arms around my neck without hesitation, the way only a 6-year-old can. Daisy looked at her mother for a long moment, and then she came and hugged me too, more carefully, but no less fiercely. I held them both. I held them until my arms shook. I stayed at the house in Apollo Bay for a week. I helped Marigold sort through Eleanor's things. We found drawings the children had made for her, recipe books with notes in her handwriting, a small wooden box containing a single photograph of Thomas Lindgren, the only one she'd ever kept. He was a tall, fair-haired man with a serious face and the beginnings of a smile. I looked at him for a long time. I didn't feel jealousy. I felt something more like gratitude for the man who had loved Eleanor first, and given the world the woman who became Marigold's mother and Daisy and Henry's grandmother. Mr. Carmichael rang me on the Wednesday. He explained the trust. Eleanor had left a substantial amount of money to be divided between Marigold's children, with the house in Apollo Bay held in trust for them when they came of age. She had also left me a letter of instruction asking that I, if I was willing, become legally connected to the family through formal grandparent recognition. Marigold and James had agreed to it a decade ago. All they had been waiting for was Eleanor's courage. Or, in the end, my willingness. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I have been thinking, in the months since, about what I learned that week. I learned that secrets are not always lies. Sometimes they are wounds that haven't healed yet, and the silence around them is the bandage. Eleanor was not a deceitful woman. She was a frightened one. There is a difference. A great difference. and though the silence cost me 40 years of grandfatherhood I didn't know I had, cost her 40 years of carrying alone, something she should never have had to carry alone. I cannot bring myself to be angry with her. I have tried. I cannot. I learned that grief does strange things to young people. Eleanor was 25 when Thomas died. 25, and pregnant, and broken. We expect young women, then and now, to make wise decisions about the rest of their lives in the middle of the worst weeks of those lives. It is too much to ask. We should be gentler with them. We should be gentler with everyone. I learned that family is not always what you are given. Sometimes it is what arrives at your door, holding a cup of tea, on the worst week of your life, and stays. I learned, too, something I want to say to anyone listening who is keeping a secret from someone they love. Tell them, whatever it is. Tell them now, while there is still time. Not because they deserve to know, though perhaps they do. Tell them because you deserve to set it down. The weight of a long secret will outlast any forgiveness it might cost you. Eleanor carried hers for 40 years, and it killed something in her long before the accident did. I saw it now, looking back. The little distances, the watchfulness, the way she sometimes flinched when I said how lucky I was to have her. She had been waiting, all those years, for a punishment that was never going to come from me, only from herself. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to the people who love you. Truth is hard, but silence is harder. And silence outlives us in ways that words never do. I sold our house on the Mornington Peninsula 3 months after Eleanor died. It was too big for one man, and too full of a woman who had been only half present in it. I moved into the house in Apollo Bay. Marigold and James and the children come down most weekends now. Daisy has decided I am to teach her how to fish. Henry has decided I am to teach him how to whistle. I am not particularly good at either, but I am learning. Sometimes in the evenings, I sit on the deck and watch the sun go down over the ocean. I think about Eleanor. I think about Thomas Lindgren, the young Swedish man who climbed a mountain 41 years ago and never came down. And how strange it is that his death set in motion the love of my life. I think about how much I miss my wife, and I think about how, in the end, she gave me the only thing she'd ever held back from me, a family, and how she did it the only way she knew how, which was to leave a key and an address, and the courage of a daughter she had loved in secret for 40 years. If you are watching this, and you are old like me, and you have someone you love who is keeping you at arm's length about something, be patient with them. They may be carrying more than you know. Make it easy for them to set it down. Tell them, in whatever way you can, that nothing they could ever say would make you love them less. Then wait and listen. Sometimes the truest love is the love that waits. And if you are young and you are carrying something heavy that you think you will carry to your grave, please, don't wait until you've run out of years. The people who love you can take more than you think. Give them the chance to prove it. Give yourself the chance to be free. Eleanor's funeral at the chapel in Frankston was beautiful. But the real goodbye for me came months later, on a Sunday afternoon in Apollo Bay, when Daisy asked me to tell her a story about her grandmother. And I did. I told her about a young woman with gray-green eyes who walked into a bushwalking club one autumn afternoon in 1986, and how I had loved her from that moment, and how I loved her still, and would love her always, every part of her, including the parts I had not known until the very end. Daisy fell asleep against my shoulder before I'd finished. Henry was already snoring on the other side of me. Marigold came in quietly and covered them with a blanket. And then she sat down beside me and took my hand. "Thank you, Grandad Gregory," she said. I didn't say anything. I just held her hand. The waves came in. The waves went out. The sun went down over the ocean my wife had loved, and the family she had hidden and given to me at last sat with me in the gathering dark. It was, I think, the most peaceful evening of my life.